Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you all. I was going to do an introductory thing, but since we're a little short on time, we'll not do that, except if you want to write in the chat box what you did with this free hour. Normally, you know, the meeting starts at 9 and it started at 10. Carrie's making a face. I'm sure you all did like emails and emergency things, but if you did anything fun or interesting in the free hour, go ahead and put it in the chat box. Oh, staff meeting. So I'm here to talk about the RPC Plus mini modules, and I'll explain that in a minute. But first, I sent all of you an email early this morning. It went out at 1 o'clock in the morning. I was not up until 1 o'clock in the morning. It was, I pre-sent it. But it went through a MailChimp, which is an email platform. And that's how we're gonna send our future trainings to you for caregivers. So I'm not sure everyone got it. The email is called "This Is It." You got it early this morning. If you could just write in the chat box if you did not get that email. So it came this morning. It's called "This Is It." It was from me. Write your name in the chat box if you didn't get it, because it might mean there's an error on our end, but more likely the error is your organization's like spam system. So great. So thank you for that. So I'm going to share my screen and do a PowerPoint to go over what we're talking about today. So let me just get ready for that. It's all in really small letters. Okay. Can folks see my screen? Sharon, shake, yeah, Carrie, okay, good. So RPC Plus mini modules, you know, what is that? What are we talking about? So some of you know this and some of you don't, but RPC Plus started in 2015. RPC Plus Tips for Tuning In is the full name. And what it is, it's a 10-week-long curriculum that's for foster, adoptive, and kin caregivers. And it explains, you know, what trauma is, the impact on the brain, attachment, gives people a lot of information. It also has a lot of strategies and tips and skills that caregivers practice in class and at home. And it also provides caregivers lots of opportunity to talk to each other and support each other. So that's the overall class. And as I said, it's a 10-week long class that meets for 2.5 hours each week. That's when we were doing it in person. Obviously, now that COVID has happened, we're making some alterations, but I'm still holding out hope that we'll meet in person again someday. And there was a request from different folks, and certainly Kathy and Megan in Burlington had a request around, can we take some of this RPC material and share it in our foster parent support groups? Is there a way that we can do that? And so what we created were these mini modules. So basically there are 10 modules that each of them capture a piece of information about RPC Plus. So that's what the mini modules are. And we did that so that it would reinforce the learning. If people did go through the 10-week class, this would reinforce their learnings. If they didn't go through the 10-week class and they felt like I can't do that, possibly going to these mini modules would encourage them to take the class. And then for those folks that never, ever, ever, ever are going to take a 10-week-long class, they're at least getting some of this information. So we began piloting this in Burlington several months ago. Obviously, COVID threw us off. We're going to be restarting soon, but that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to go over what the different topics are. I'm going to talk to you about how a typical group runs. I'm going to talk about some adaptations that we might need to make if you choose to do this virtually. Talk about supplemental reports and support from us. So, but first, I want to take a couple polls to get a sense of where folks are. So here's the first poll, and if those of you are on the phone, I'll read it, and I know you can't respond, but I'm just going to let you know what it is. So the first question is, my district's foster parent support group meets, and here are the options, meets regularly even through COVID. We used to meet regularly pre-COVID. We are meeting virtually now. We will start meeting virtually soon. We will probably not meet again until it is safe to do so in person. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what folks are doing with foster parent support groups.
Amy, what do you want us to do if our answer doesn't fit in these options?
Tell me out loud what your answer is.
That we have not been able to figure out a way to meet. We've been unsuccessful in getting our support group to meet.
Even pre-COVID?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd be more than happy to talk to you sometime offline, outside of this meeting about some ideas, or I'm sure you've been thinking about that and talking about it. But so just don't answer it then on this poll, I guess.
I'm on the phone, so I can't answer the poll, but we just started meeting virtually.
Great.
So I'm curious, about a little less than half of people responded. For those who didn't respond, is that because you're not running support groups?
So here are the poll results. Okay, that's helpful. I'm gonna do one more quick poll. You got that, Sharon? Sorry.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Here's the second poll. I just would love to get a sense of numbers of people that are coming. So this question for those on the phone is just how many people tend to come to your foster parent support groups? Okay, I'm gonna end this poll in a second. So 1 to 5 seems to be the range. Great. And I'm going to do one final poll. And this is about your comfort level in teaching. So and this is anonymous. The choice is no sweat, I could teach all day. I enjoy it, but get a little freaked out ahead of time. I would rather not, but I will do it if I have to, or nope. All right, here are our results. I would rather not do it, but I will if I have to. 46%. Woo! Well, hopefully we can change some of that. Thank you. I appreciate everyone participating in that. And I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint for a second. Okay. So here are the different, so the mini modules, as I said, there are 10 freestanding classes. They last between an hour to 2 hours, really depending, a lot of that depends on how much conversation you have with folks. So I'm just going to review what the different topics are so you know what they are. So the first one is trauma in the brain, and obviously this is talking about how trauma impacts the development of children's brain, and then how caregivers can create opportunities for growth and healing in children. Attachment and attunement, it talks about what healthy attachment is, as well as some of, yeah.
Your poll is still up.
Huh.
There you go. I didn't realize I could click it out. Sorry about that.
Okay. I'm going back to the screen. Sorry, everybody. Attachment and attunement. And a big piece of that is how caregivers can promote healing through attunement. And we talk about different kinds of attunement and how to actually do that. The third one is watching the Resilience movie and then talking about ACEs. So going into some more detail about what the ACEs are and how that impacts youth. The importance of play. So whole classes just on that. Co-regulation and caregiver self-regulation. Risk and protective factors, building resilience, working with birth families, lifelong issues in adoption, secondary traumatic stress and the importance of self-care, and grief and loss for children in foster care. So those are the different topics. And I'm going to do one final poll because I'd like to get a sense of what folks think about those different topics. So the question here is, of those different modules, pick the top 3 that you think caregivers in your district would want to learn about, even if you're not running a foster parent support group now.
Oh, gosh.
Give you about 10 more seconds. I'm going to end the poll now. So the winner is working with birth families. That's very helpful to hear that. And then second place looks like trauma and the brain and attachment and attunement. Sharon, can you get pictures of this?
Down so I can get the second part now.
You good?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, thank you. So those are the different topics. So let me just talk to you a little bit about the logistics. Oh, was my poll still showing?
I just turned it off.
Okay. So each mini module is freestanding. What I mean by that is a foster parent could come to one of those and never go to any of the rest of them, and they still get some valuable information. I mentioned before the time range is between 1 to 2 hours, really depends on the group and how talkative they are or not. It's okay for you to make your own decisions around, there's maybe one slide in the presentation that people really want to focus on. It's okay to spend longer time on that. Or you might decide you're going to skip the next 3 slides because you've run out of time or they're not relevant for that audience. You know, the curriculum is sent to you in the form of a PowerPoint with detailed notes about how to teach that piece. And I want you to really add your own stuff because that's what's going to make it really work. So if I put a couple of examples and stories in there when you're teaching it. You don't have to use my stories. If you have your own story, and you probably do, about a certain situation, use that to help illustrate whatever you're talking about. When you get the materials, well, first let me back up. This is completely optional. No one has to do this. This is only if you choose to do this. So if you do choose to do this, I'll make sure that you get the PowerPoints. In those PowerPoints, there will be detailed notes about how to teach each part of the class. Before you prepare to teach the class, obviously it's really important that you review the materials ahead of time, watch the videos, make sure you check your technology. And I'm always available for consultation or support. So if you decide you want to do this, we can set up a time to talk and go through it. I'm guessing that Kathy and Megan would be happy to talk with you about it, as they ran it in person successfully. They haven't started the virtual part. So those are some of the logistics. Questions about that so far?
Hi, it's Naomi. I actually am wondering if Kathy and Megan have any insight as to how, like, was it something that was popular in your district? Or are you just kind of starting to work through any issues? Just wondering how many people were showing up.
So this is Kathy. We did 2 of them, and probably had, I don't know, 5 or 6 people for each one, which for us is like, that's a lot of people. Our monthly meeting sometimes is 2 or 3 people. So for us to get 5, we were super happy. So, I mean, we were happy with the turnout, and like Amy was saying, you know, the curriculum is all right there, and there was a few activities that I kind of changed because it's for a larger group, but it's really easy to kind of do it on the fly.
Mhm.
And I would just add too, although they are standalone and we could have had different groups of people each time, we did tend to have the same group of people, which was also nice because they kind of like formed their cohort and made connections. So it was nice for them to have that same group. Whether that would have stayed that way had we been able to continue, we don't know, but you know, I think there's definitely benefits to having it be freestanding and to come and go as you please, but there's also benefits to having a consistent group as well.
I'm wondering, Kathy, do you know how many people, or Amy, how many people then decided that they wanted to take the full RPC Plus course?
I don't know that. I know one of the couple that was coming had already taken RPC Plus, and they were actually a huge support, not only for me, but for the other people in the class. You know, they did a great job talking it up. So I was happy to hear that.
You know, one idea for folks who are having a hard time getting their groups going, what do you call them? Support groups? Foster parent meetings, or are they called different things?
We have called them support groups, but then I think you had mentioned something about taking the word support out. So we were just calling it foster parent monthly meeting.
Okay. Oh, then I had another idea, but I lost it. Oh, the next time RPC Plus, the full class, runs in your district, that group of people, they are perfect to grab them to start a new foster parent support group. They're often very disappointed at the end of the 10 weeks that they can't meet with each other anymore. So that, for those of you who are struggling with people, that might be something to do, is just maybe you even talk to the trainer or talk to me, and you go to one of the RPC Plus classes and do your pitch. So that's one idea. Okay, a couple more things. The typical structure of a class, and this is laid out in the PowerPoint, there's some kind of welcome and introductions. I'm sure you all know this, but it's always really important to have some joining. So sometimes having a silly question or something like that can be helpful. Obviously, always talk about confidentiality. Talk about self-care. With some of these, especially, you know, some of the harder ones, folks can get emotional or reactive to that. So obviously you want to talk about that. Then there's the content. So whatever that content is for that month. And then at the very end, the final question, every mini module is going to be, what did you learn and what will you do? And so I just encourage some kind of checkout question where folks can take a moment to reflect. It'll help anchor some of their learning. So what did they learn? So they make that connection. And then they also project into the future. What will I do with that information? So hopefully they'll say something like, I'm going to talk to my child differently, or I'm going to ask this question, or whatever that might be. So that's the typical structure. Well, any questions about that? That's pretty straightforward. So, you know, then in terms of virtual modifications, so we're all doing this. We're all trying to figure out ways to make these modifications. And this is certainly one of the areas I'd be happy to problem solve and brainstorm with you. But some obvious things some main things to be aware of. Whatever your virtual platform is, get really super familiar with it. A lot of these mini modules have videos. And as you know, there's challenges with showing videos on these platforms. So you could skip the videos. Most of the videos are great, and I hate to have you skip them. You could send the videos to people ahead of time, send the videos to people afterwards. You could make a decision in the moment. Is everyone, you know, is the technology, with the group of people that are there at that time, none of them are on the phone, they all have good connection, you have good connection, and you could show the videos. So that's a hard part of this virtual world that we're in. Asking folks to change their names on the screens can actually help build connection in the room so that folks know who they're talking to. It's just like having a name tag on. If you have breakout rooms or chat box, make sure you're really familiar with that. And every single time, it's really important that you explain those concepts to people at the beginning. You know, every single time you need to remind people to mute because people inevitably forget, and some people have not been to many of these before. It can be really helpful to have, when you ask different questions, instead of saying, what does everyone think, that you call on each person. That can be a really helpful thing to get people to talk. A 2-hour Zoom call, as you know, can be deadly. That's what we're doing today. So hopefully you'll all stay alive with me. But it's possible you might want to do shorter sessions. Any thoughts about virtual modifications or any other tips that people have? Or are Kathy and Megan, as you're thinking of making the conversion, how do you think that's going to go?
I guess I'm just curious to know what platform people are going to use. I mean, I see those kind of, that tidbit of information, and that's for Zoom. So I'm just wondering what platform.
Say yes if you do Zoom.
I don't think we can, right? I think
No.
we have to use
Oh.
Skype.
So it would be Skype. Your options would be Skype or Teams.
Our NCSS partner holds our support groups, and I believe they use Zoom.
I think you're right, Sarah.
Yeah, so you guys can use Zoom if somebody else launches the meeting other than DCF, which is interesting. But
So obviously the platform and how to do this is one of the challenges that folks have to figure out. What I was going to have us do for the rest of our time is to actually go through the first two modules. The first one's trauma in the brain, and the second one is attachment and attunement. So I'll go through them quickly, but it'll give you a sense of what's in that material, give you opportunity to ask questions about certain parts and how you might teach that and what that might be like. So any other questions or comments before I start that? Okay.
if you all think it would be helpful, also, Amy was just talking about, asking engaging questions. I have some handouts about how to phrase open-ended questions. If you think that that would be helpful for me to send you those handouts, I'd be happy to do that.
Sharon, I would be happy to see them. This is Kathy.
I'll just send them to everybody as a resource for this.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure I said this out loud, but there are supplemental materials that come with, so if you're teaching about trauma in the brain, you get a couple of handouts that give you more specific information just to use for your information as you teach it. Can you guys see my screen? It says trauma in the brain. Yes, great, excellent. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I'm actually gonna put it in presenter view because I think, so this would be a really important thing for you to know how to do if you don't, is to use presenter view when you're doing a presentation. I don't know if this is gonna show, how well is this showing up, Sharon? She's ignoring me. That's okay.
I think she's just muted.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. The print is small, but the layout shows fine.
Well, I'm just gonna quickly, just so people see this for a second. Okay, here's and this is just an example, I won't stay on the slide this way, but if you are in presenter view, then you can see what everyone else is seeing, but then you also have a notes section. So every single PowerPoint slide has a notes section, and that's what that's what guides you through the slides. What I always do when I'm doing online presentations, I did it today, is I print out the whole PowerPoint with the notes section so that I can see that in front of me, because as you see, what you're all looking at now is hard to see because it's small. So I am going to switch back to the regular view and just talk you through it. Okay, so here's trauma in the brain. Here's the agenda that you lay out for people ahead of time. We're going to go through welcome and introductions. So this is the first slide. This confidentiality and self-care slide is the same every single time. So it's just a reminder to folks about that. And you can certainly add or whatever you want to say in this piece around self-care and confidentiality. This is our topic. The first thing we do is watch a video. I'm not going to show you this video now, but it's a 4 or 5 minute long video that just talks about how brains are built, and it kind of starts the conversation going about some things. Then this is a way of having a video discussion. Instead of just saying, so what did you think of the video, that you break it into a conversation around feelings, facts, and function. So this is an opportunity that you can either do this with everyone in the whole group, because you have a small group of people, you can just talk through these together. If you have a larger group, you would break up into smaller groups to talk through this. Then, here's a slide with some information about toxic stress. And this section in particular has a lengthy notes section. So the purpose of those lengthy notes is not to have you read what's written here. Ideally, you are, talking about these things. You read the information ahead of time, you get clear what you think about that piece, and then you explain it to folks. And again, this is one of the examples where it's perfect for you to add an example of some of these things. If there's a certain child or family that you're aware of, you can confidentially share some information that could be really helpful. Now we're going to talk about, before we can talk too much about the brain, we want to talk some about trauma. So one of the first activities is, why do we want to talk about trauma? Why is that important? So we want to set that up. I'm just going to put all these out here. You all know all these reasons. So this also helps bring it from the child experienced trauma to that trauma comes into our homes and impacts us. And when we're impacted, it can disrupt a placement. So this is helping to make that link for caregivers. And then we acknowledge that this is really hard, right? And you're gonna have caregivers who, this is a moment, this is one of those times where you can make a decision, right? This could be a time where you just go over the slide quickly, or you have a longer conversation and you allow people to share some of their thoughts and feelings about this. Then we kind of jump to this idea of the solution. What's the solution of dealing with these kids with really challenging behaviors? The solution is to become a trauma-informed parent, right? A trauma-informed caregiver. And the more you know about trauma and the brain and the impact, I know you guys all know this, but the better it'll be. So then the next part is again, another activity. What is trauma? And so this is where you pause and you want to really elicit a conversation from folks, whether that's virtually or in person, around what do they think trauma is? If you're able to write down their responses, either in a chat box or a flip chart, depending, it can really lead to a fruitful conversation. And this is where there's a lot of room for you. So people will say all kinds of things. And as they say something, then you can add a piece of information. So there might be someone might say something that's not accurate, or it just gives you a great opportunity to talk a little bit more about what trauma is. So then after you have all those answers, you've got them thinking. So they're kind of open to this idea of what trauma is. They're thinking about what do they really think about it. Then we give them what an accurate definition of a traumatic experience is. So we talk through this. So then we talk through different types of trauma. We talk about acute trauma, right? So acute trauma is something that happens one time. So it could be a car accident, a robbery, a tornado, a sexual assault. So it's a one-time thing that happens. That doesn't mean it's less significant, but it's a single incident. Second kind of trauma is chronic trauma. So something that lasts over a long period of time. So domestic violence, being hospitalized, being in a war-torn country, living through COVID, right? So there's this chronic trauma that happens. And certainly someone can have acute trauma, like they were in a car accident, that's the acute trauma, but then the chronic trauma is that they have to have multiple surgeries and are hospitalized for a long period of time. So that adds the chronic piece. This question often comes up at this point, which is about, about neglect. Is neglect trauma? And this is an opportunity to really explain that piece to folks, because of course it is trauma. And as we know, in some ways it can be the worst impact on our kids. So we talk through some of these pieces. This is often one of those points where folks are a little surprised that I think a lot of folks believe that neglect is not great, but not horrible. And so talking through this can be eye-opening for some caregivers. Then we talk about the concept of complex developmental trauma. So complex developmental trauma has three components. One, there are multiple traumatic events. So there's domestic violence in the home, and the father is substance abusing, and there's been physical abuse, and sometimes mom passes out, and when she passes out, the next door neighbor shows up and sexually abuses the kids. So there's lots of things going on. That's one component of developmental trauma. The second component is that trauma begins at a very young age, right? And so it's really different when that impact happens to a 1-year-old versus a 10-year-old versus a 20-year-old. And then finally, the part that we all know is so difficult is that the trauma is caused by the adults who are supposed to be caring for the child. So this also is one of those places in this training where caregivers can have an emotional response, because this might be the first time they're like, when they think about the children in their care and that all of the stuff that's happened for them. So just to be aware of that emotional piece that can happen at this point. Actually, I'm going to pause for a second. Questions, thoughts, comments about anything I've done so far? Okay.
So actually, Amy, I'm just going to jump in. Just to clarify what you said earlier, each of the presentations are going to follow this same format, right? Where the PowerPoints are completely done, the notes are available, the bullets are all there. So it's more, I mean, in the RCs and the RRSs really know this information already, but it's really just following the path that's written out. Pause when, you know, spend more time when it seems like the people in the room don't get it, and move quicker when it seems to be an easier concept.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes. And part of why I'm going through these, I know that this is a lot of this is information that you are all familiar with, but just so you get a sense of the way that I'm teaching this, and to note the places that I'm aware participants might struggle. So then we talk about the whole idea of, you know, if a child lives in a home, you know, where there's domestic violence or abuse or whatever's happening, that they kind of get stuck in survival mode. It's as if a bear was attacking us right now, we'd all be running and screaming. What happens if the bear lives in your house? So talk through this piece a little bit. This is just a slide that goes into some examples of how childhood trauma impacts kids. Again, you all know this, but having it broken out this way can actually be really helpful. You know, especially around some of the learning stuff. This is often a surprise for folks. You know, the up in the top cognition, some of the issues around being ready to learn and language delays, that's often a surprise for folks. It's often a surprise for folks that these things are related to trauma. So again, this is a moment to share with them.
Amy,
Yes.
this is Kathy. That slide, when I did this, we got stuck on for a very, very long time. People were fascinated about all of the different ways that trauma impacts kids. And I actually copied this and like sent it to people, just this piece, because I think it really helps people understand, like, you know, it's not just that trauma affected their sleep, it's that trauma affects every single piece of their being. So this slide for me and for the people that were in the class was super helpful.
That's really helpful to hear. And what you also made me think of is sometimes when you do these things virtually, people don't respond as much. So this might be a perfect slide now that you know that you really pause on and let people absorb it.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
You know, in the notes section for this, ask some questions that you could ask. Which of these things have you noticed in the children in your home? Is anyone surprised about these things that came from trauma? What have you done to help your kids with any of these? Okay, so then we do a little bit of an education piece. How do children respond to trauma? So we talk about, you know, we break down some of the other ways that it affects them. And again, this can, if it affects a child's ability to trust others, that means they have trouble trusting us. So helping caregivers to not take those things personally. So talking through this, we talk about some, you know, these hyperarousal, re-experiencing, avoidance, and withdrawal. And again, would be great if you have your own examples of these. This could really help flesh out the presentation. So talk about hyperarousal, re-experiencing, avoidance, and withdrawal. We talk about some of the, about trauma reminders and what might happen to our kids with those things. And then this also can be a point where some good conversation happens, which is around why kids might react to trauma differently. So this is when you can talk about age and developmental stage and temperament and all of these pieces. So this also helps make it bigger for folks, not bigger in a bad way, but more complex, so they understand kind of all the layers and layers and layers of trauma. So then we end it on this video, which I thought that we could all watch. It's about 12 minutes long, but let me pause. So this is the last thing that we do, and then we have a conversation about this video, and then there's the checking out. So any other questions, comments, thoughts about this module?
It seems really simple to follow along, and I like the fact that all of them are the same. So I think it'd be easy enough to, you know, especially if you had the talking points as well. It looks great.
Great.
Because of the way the brain works, you will always remember your very first roller coaster ride. Storing these new experiences is one of the brain's main jobs. In fact, your brain creates a mental blueprint of every new experience you have. A blueprint for any new touch is stored in one part of the brain. A blueprint for any new sound in a different part. And a blueprint for any new sight in still another part. But as powerful as that first roller coaster ride was, it can't compete with the lingering effects of your brain's earliest experiences. Although you have no conscious memory of this part of your childhood, it is these very first experiences that literally become the building blocks for your whole life.
Unlike other organs, the brain is undeveloped at birth, and it is waiting for experiences to shape how it will develop. The amazing thing about the human brain is that the younger you are, the more sponge-like your brain is, which is the reason that children in 3 years can learn language, can learn to walk, can do all kinds of incredible things. But the very same biological sponginess that allows us to rapidly acquire language is also the same sponginess that makes young children more vulnerable to trauma than older children.
We have the opportunity to do police ride-alongs to a domestic violence situation, and so this was actually the first call I ever rode along. It was dinner time, and they were having spaghetti for dinner. It was dripping down the walls, the kitchen table was overturned, and we had 3 children in the household. Looking at this whole situation at the time, we said, no evidence of physical harm, the kids are fine. We learned differently, of course. The boy in the corner was classic behavior that we see with kids who have had chronic exposure to violence. He would just completely zone out, numb out as things started to get scary. The 6-year-old little girl on the chair blames herself for what's going on, but actually it was 4 years later that we really appreciated who had some of the most profound or severe harm coming out of this situation, and that was the 6-month-old baby who was now 4.5 and had seriously injured another child in preschool.
It's literally the opposite of the way most people think about this. Most people think young children, they don't really understand what's going on and they're resilient. But the fact is, if anybody's impacted more severely, it's the younger child.
The brain is put together like building blocks in a sense. Those first blocks that go together are the more primitive area, the survival brain.
The brain develops from the bottom to the top and from the inside out, so that the normal development of the top part of the brain depends upon healthy development of lower parts of the brain. The top part of the brain, where you do all of your thinking, is the part of the brain that is most changeable, easiest to modify. But unfortunately, if a child has developmental experiences of threat and exposure to domestic violence, the lower parts of the brain will be impacted and they're harder to change as they get older.
He was never physically abusive, but he was verbally abusive. There was lots and lots of screaming in front of the kids, berating, putting me down, and they pretty much heard it all.
Children exposed to domestic violence, children who witness their parents fighting, literally are experiencing a state of fear. And when this happens, the systems in your brain that are involved in thinking at the top part of your brain are literally shut down. It changes the brains of these children.
My son has seen and heard a lot of the violent outbursts. He was experiencing night terrors, and that was probably his way of dealing with it, because in his waking state, he didn't know how to articulate at 2.5 years old. So it was coming through, when he was asleep.
When kids are chronically stressed, one of the problems that we see is difficulty in attachment, in bonding, because they're so focused on survival. It's hard for them to reach out and connect with others.
My oldest boy went through a stage where he would bully his younger brother and seemingly laugh in glee. He was not remorseful or had no empathy that he could actually make someone cry. Many phone calls of him being disruptive in the classroom. He was a very bright kid, but that's when I knew that he was heading toward trouble.
A lot of these kids get labeled as being, bad, difficult, defiant. This is a very natural response to their circumstance. What the child is doing is a survival strategy for them, but it creates behaviors that are very difficult in the classroom. When they're in a crisis mode, they can't learn.
The tragic reality of children growing up in domestic violence is that they end up with mental health problems at a rate higher than children who are actually the direct victims of physical abuse.
My mother was a victim of domestic violence. My father was an alcoholic, a drug user, and it's just a cocktail for a bad living environment for children. My brother, he looked like he was crying on his way home. Me not knowing, I was just a careless little 6-year-old, seeing him climb up to my mom's medicine cabinet. I asked him what he was doing, and he boldly said, I'm killing myself. 8-year-olds don't talk like that. The first person I thought to call was my best friend's mom. By the time she came down to our apartment, he had a butcher knife in his hand. He was just cutting himself all over his body, and I was just bawling, just crying. There was nothing I could do to help. My brother was crying. He didn't want to be there. He was trying to run out. But I had already known that my home, wasn't my home. It wasn't a place where I felt safe.
Childhood exposure to violence is about living in a threatening, scary environment that may escalate to physical violence, but it often doesn't have to. It's the chaos, the uncertainty, the fear of being in a home where things aren't okay. Very interesting talking about the roller coaster, because that's what we hear from adult survivors who are in violent households and also the children. The hard part for them, I think, is thinking about what is normal instead of this up and down life of being in a violent, threatening relationship.
Growing up in my home, there were 6 children. My mother and father, unfortunately, fought like cats and dogs. As a result of that, 2 of my brothers ended up being batterers. I have 2 sisters. Even today, they date men that batter them.
Exposure to violence is a lifetime legacy. We see that adults who have had negative childhood experiences often have coping behaviors that can be unhealthy. That certainly has huge effects on how one is going to parent.
It's really important for parents to understand that their internal state, whether it's calm, or whether it's alert engagement, or whether it's frustration and anger, or whether it's sadness, depression, the baby absorbs these internal states.
I have been in the moment with that sense of helplessness and hopelessness and stress and anxiety and rage. It really damages the brains of small children to be under a constant level of stress and anxiety. Every day I hope that I haven't damaged my kid in any way.
They need to see from you as a parent how to deal with stressful situations in an appropriate manner. Being rational, not resorting to violence to deal with situations. Your children are going to learn how to deal with stress from you.
Luckily, my older son is verbal enough and is old enough now that we have conversations about how did it make you feel when that was going on? Was that scary for you? Yeah, and validating that.
The biggest thing that helps children exposed to violence is to be able to talk about their feelings, get those critical messages. It's not your fault.
Any conflict, I'm able now to stop before I add to it. I'm able to step away rather than trying to solve it at that moment in a state of heightened anger.
Just try not to go through it alone. If you have a strong support system, and know what avenues you have available to you, in case you do need to get out. I was glad that we got help when we did.
One of the great things about brain science that we've learned is till the day you die, you have the ability to add new neurons in your brain, that the brain is more like skin in the sense that it can rewire and heal itself in the most important area, the cortex. We have the capacity to heal and do better. The biggest thing we can do for kids exposed to violence is how many healthy adults can they connect to.
I did a lot of my childhood in other people's homes, so I saw what positive relationships were about. I saw my friends were normal. You know, they didn't have the rage I had. Seeing parents that were together, that showed affection. Home dinners where everybody sat together. Those are the things that I realized were important. And instead of being envious, I incorporated it into my life. I wanted to be a part of that.
I know school is what made a difference for me. The teachers, the attention I got, letting me know that I could be somebody and I could do something.
In fact, my oldest son, his teachers, you know, all 6 of them were very instrumental in coming forward and providing him support when he needed. They allowed him to be homeschooled to give him time to heal.
The hardest part about being a parent now is trying to be different than how my parents raised me. Am I being a good father? What do I need to do to help you feel safe in your home?
That's the part, the brain development part, that I think we want him to know what normal is for us. And normal is having people who support you and who love you and who want to take care of you. And that we want that to be his normal life.
It's one of those pay me now or pay me later. And the truth is, children who are good at self-regulation, good at self-soothing, don't cry very much, and end up being, if you will, successful, are children who have had incredibly attentive early caregiving, which some people, unfortunately, think of as spoiling. It's exactly the opposite. Rather than spoiling the newborn, what you're doing is you are building in healthy self-regulation.
So those are the things that I want to create an environment for my baby where he gets the benefit of what I've learned from all these experts and also other parents. And believe me, they're experts too.
The most important thing that parents need to understand is that the brain of their child will become exactly what the child was exposed to. If you want your child to be kind, then you have to be kind to your child. If you want your child to be good at self-regulation and not lose their temper, you have to not lose your temper. And that's the beauty of the human brain. It is a mirror to the child's developmental experience.
So thoughts about that use of that video and what you could imagine as a discussion about that video being, or questions or thoughts that might come up from participants?
I have a couple thoughts. They kind of touch on a bunch of different things that were said. And they're not in any particular order, but one of the things I feel very strongly about is the school connection, and that I don't know to what level our engagement with schools are, but schools are not necessarily advocates for children in trauma. They can actually create toxic response. And I think that that's something that we should maybe train in some way. How do we support and respond to a family with a child who is finding, who is being triggered in school and who is not being supported in the school? And I will say that I think sometimes schools are ponderous in their oversight of children, and they create a scenario where the child is more marginalized because of the way they involve themselves with children. So I just want to raise that as a question, as a possible way for us to consider training, and maybe look at a topic with that in mind down the road. And I'd be very curious as to what people's responses to that, to what I just said. And I'll pause there because I have another thought too about traumatic memory, but I just wondered if anyone has any thoughts about the school connection.
I have a couple of immediate reactions, and one is, I work with the Adoption Consortium, and we've been doing some trainings with schools around adoption. I also know that there are a lot of trainings around the state to make schools more trauma informed. And, you know, as you know, some schools are better at that than others. Some teachers and administrators are better at that than others. But what it made me think about is that we might want to talk about doing trainings for schools around foster care too, foster care specifically. So thank you for that idea. And then the other thing is, if you're teaching this class and watching this video and that comes up somewhere along the way around frustration with school, I think that's always a choice point when you're presenting something, right? So you want to give people a time, validate their concerns, let them vent a little bit, right? But you also have to be careful that it doesn't turn into a, you know, hour-long venting session where nothing productive happens. So then how do you channel that energy around advocacy? So it also makes me think about how do we do more support, training, advice to caregivers around how they can advocate effectively within the school system. Other thoughts that people have to what Mary brought up? Or Mary, did you want to say something?
Oh, wait, I'll give other people a chance to reply. The only other thing. Oh, go ahead.
Was someone else saying something? Actually, go ahead, Mary.
So the other thought that I had was, and this goes out to, you know, in terms of how to engage people in group calls, like, you know, we have 22 people on this call, and it's not unusual that only a few people, you know, the people who are giving the training speak, and then maybe occasionally there's a comment put in. But this is a question I ask people all the time. It has nothing to do with my job, but I think it might be helpful in this case. And I ask people a question if I'm doing an interview with somebody or just, you know, getting to know them better, is what's your very first conscious memory? And I find that the answers are fascinating. And I'm going to just leave it out there for each of you to think, what is your very first conscious memory? And if anybody wants to email that thought, I'd love to hear what that is, because I will tell you that what I've learned from asking that question is if it's a benevolent memory or if it's a traumatic memory, it says a tremendous amount of that person's kind of where they're footed in the world. And I have found it fascinating to hear the response to that. And it's actually very revelatory when people hear it themselves and they go, oh, I didn't realize that my fear of the dark was based upon la da 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 da. And they don't even necessarily know it themselves. So it's an easy question to ask. What's your very first conscious memory? And you can identify, you know, the earlier a person gets is an interesting response, and the responses are pretty fascinating. And I mean, if anyone wants to share, I'd be curious. And I don't want to take over the meeting, but it's an interesting question, I think.
Yeah, if anyone wants to answer, go for it.
I just want to make a comment about that, is that we always have to remember that a lot of people who come to this work also have a trauma history. And so asking what your first conscious memory is could be unexpectedly triggering for someone. And, you know, just to keep that in mind, to know your audience.
Thanks, Sharon.
I really, really appreciate that, because I have a high ACEs score personally. So like anytime I've ever gone to trauma trainings, I get triggered all the time. And so I do think, like, especially people who are running trauma-informed workshops need to be really cautious and careful, and maybe give their audience an ACEs score first before they start. Like I've been insulted at meetings where people are like, oh, those people with trauma. And it's like, wow, some of us are okay and resilient and have done great things. So like, I think there should be more strengths-based approaches to it. And yeah, like I think some of us have blocked things out. So that memory question is really tricky.
Thank you, Carrie. I think I'm having COVID brain for a second, sorry. But I think one of the things I find with training, and this is me, and you all have to make your own decisions, I find I train best when I do some level of self-disclosure about any, you know, but any, it doesn't have anything about myself. There's a we-ness when you can run a class and there's a we-ness in the class. I feel like you have a lot more, it's more powerful. People get more out of it. People can be transformed in trainings. I've seen it happen. And a part of it is by doing my own bit of self-disclosure. That being said, right, we all have to take care of ourselves, protect ourselves, stay in that trainer role and not fall apart, right? But I think that that can be, it's an interesting balancing act for folks. Other reactions to the video or how you might lead a conversation about it? I made a couple of mistakes with the video, so I just wanted to point those out. One, I didn't warn you ahead of time that it could be triggering, so that's something you should do. Warn people over and over and over again. It just can be helpful. Also, the folks that are on the phone obviously couldn't see the video. What would have been helpful is if I had said, hey, I'm going to send you the link right now, and maybe, because some people maybe can see it on their computer while they're on the phone, they may not be able to. But then I also would now send the link, and I will send the link to everybody so folks can watch it later. The other thing, go ahead.
That was my thought too, just, you know, listening to it, like the screaming, and then it's like, oh, it's someone on a roller coaster. I'm like, oh, well, that sounded horrifying. I didn't know what it was.
Sorry, Sarah. That was really mean of me. I'm really sorry.
No, it's a good point though, like to, you know, to send the link, like for people that are on the phone.
Right. Anyone else? The other thing that I wanted to say about this video and about the end of this class, this video ended on hope, right? It ended on hope, and it ended on practical ideas for things for people to do. Anytime you teach one of these classes, it is really important to end on a place of hope, positivity, and people thinking about the next steps for themselves to help empower them to take whatever next step that is for them. So keep that in mind, especially if some of the groups get emotional.
Can I add something to that, Amy?
Yes.
That sometimes, you know, I think any RC who's actually been in the room, for the RCs who have been with us for a while, when we've been training, you always reach that point where you're like, oh my gosh, I have 15 minutes left, or I have 10 minutes left, right? And what Amy was just saying, you know, end on a piece of hope. At that point, even if you aren't through what you wanted to get through, to dig out the hopeful piece, so you're not like hurrying up and being like, and remember trauma this, and remember, you know, where you're just offloading a bunch of information. It's more important to take the pause, do the checkout, let people know you didn't get to some of the information, but they have the information in their PowerPoints, but to really make sure that you regather people before they leave the room.
Thanks, Sharon. That's always, 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 always more important than the content. And then, Carrie, wanted to follow up on this. You talked about the ACEs score for the audience. I don't know if this is what you were saying, but doing an ACEs, doing their own score, is that what you meant, like individuals doing it?
Yeah, I watched a training one time. I think it was related to like a TED Talk or something, and they had a whole room full of professionals, and they all anonymously did their ACEs score. But then they talked about it, and they're like, we have a range from 1 to 10, or you know, whatever it was. And it was just eye-opening because people started looking around and realizing their colleagues had also been through things, which I think is like half the reason probably anyone works in any human services field, is because you can relate. You can, or you might have come at it on the other side, so you can help. But my work when I did early intervention and home visiting with families, like we were so trauma trained that at one point it just all started sounding the same too. So I like your approach of let's make it a little personal, not too emotional, but like also walk away points are super important to me when I go to a training. If I leave a training without a takeaway, it doesn't feel productive for me. So I think that's a super, like, here's your 3 things to keep in mind if you have a foster child who's in your home with trauma, you know, whatever they may be. But I wish I knew, because then I would do my own consulting business and get paid big money. But yeah, I like that point of the takeaways. I think that's really helpful.
I think the movie, your video you're talking about is the Resilience movie, actually has a whole thing about professionals and their ACE score and the reaction to that. I would just I'm not saying you suggested this, but I would just caution you about having folks do their ACE score, do their own ACE score in one of your trainings.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I just meant like being mindful about it, and maybe even having a one-liner. Like, some of us may have a history of trauma, so we're going to try to be sensitive. Please let us know if it's too much, or if you feel like you need to take a break, just walk out or shut your video down, or whatever we're doing in COVID time.
Absolutely.
No, I was not suggesting. I do not want to do ACE scores with foster parents.
Great, thanks. What I wanted to do is now go through the second week, which is attachment and attunement. And as I said, there are 10 weeks. I will coach you, talk you through, problem solve, if you decide to do this. So, this training is short and brief and kind of hitting on some highlights, but I'm more than willing to talk you through this if you decide to do this. So I'm going to switch to the attachment and attunement slideshow. Okay. So obviously attachment and attunement is important. We have the same, we lay out the agenda just like we did for the other ones. We talk about confidentiality and self-care, same as last slide. And then our focus here is on attachment. So we want to lay a groundwork. Well, why are we talking about attachment? Well, this is an opportunity to talk about how trauma also impacts attachment. So we just make that connection to trauma for folks. We give this definition of trauma, if you just want to read through it. And this is one of those perfect moments to add whatever your own understanding of attachment is, or any experience you have professionally around attachment and how that impacts kids. But again, this is laying the groundwork so people understand a little bit more about attachment. We talk about why it's important. So kids who have strong early childhood attachment, right? These are all things that you know, but your caregivers may not know. So just a training strategy thing. You'll notice I didn't talk while I had went through the different parts of the slide, and I probably could have actually been quiet longer because you may not have all read through it. But the brain can't look at a PowerPoint slide and read that information and hear me talking at the same time. So sometimes we feel self-conscious when we're silent during a training, but actually it's really helpful sometimes to just button it and let folks read it on their own. If you're concerned about literacy of anybody in your room, then I would read these things out loud, but don't comment on them. And if you can avoid reading what they can read themselves, you should avoid doing that. So then we're gonna jump to another video, and I apologize, it's a video of me. You've seen enough of me today, but it's a 5-minute long video, and it really lays out healthy and unhealthy attachment. It's kind of what the whole rest of this class is based on. So Sharon, I'm gonna try, first, any questions or comments before I jump ahead? Okay, so I'm going to hopefully be able to show you this video. See it? Sharon, you'll give me a thumbs up if people can hear it, right?
Trauma also impacts attachment in significant and profound ways for children who experienced complex developmental trauma. So I want to talk first about what healthy attachment is and how we can recognize that. So if you think of a child, think of a newborn baby, what happens all day long? What do they need? They need food and water and changing and comforting, all kinds of things. So they have needs all day long. And what does that baby do when they have a need? They somehow signal discomfort, right? And usually they signal discomfort through crying, screaming, wailing. Somehow they communicate to us that they have a need. So what do? We try and figure out how to satisfy that need. So what we do is we pick them up, we feed them, we hold them, we rock them, we do something to satisfy their need. Then the baby somehow signals comfort. Frequently, they stop crying, they smile, they do something that's very reinforcing to us. And then what happens? They have another need, right? And this cycle happens over and over and over again, multiple times in the course of a baby's life, right? They have a need, they signal discomfort, we attempt to satisfy that need, and then they somehow signal comfort. So if this happens most of the time, no one can get it all the time. The best parent in the world will not get this 100% of the time. But if most of the time you're attempting to satisfy their need, most of the time you're doing that, they'll signal comfort, which is a great reinforcing piece, right? There's nothing like a baby smiling at you. And that's really reinforcing because the job of parenting is really difficult. So that smile is our reward. So you've done this over and over and over again. And what happens to that child? That child develops a sense of security, a sense of trust, a sense of attachment and connection to you, a sense of self-regulation. They've learned how to calm themselves because you've taught them how to calm themselves. And they also learn this thing called object constancy. And what that means is that it's like they have you inside them. So they begin to know what reactions you'll have to them, and they feel connected to you even if they're not in the room with you. So these are all the things that happen in a good, healthy, typical attachment. So what happens in an unhealthy attachment scenario? So in an unhealthy attachment scenario, children still have needs, right? They're still hungry, thirsty, uncomfortable, sick, so they still have a need. They still somehow signal that discomfort, probably through crying. And here's where things shift, right? Sometimes their needs are satisfied, and sometimes their needs are not satisfied. You know, even in a family where there's significant abuse happening, there are periods of time where those caregivers are satisfying their child's needs, and in fact are probably being really amazing parents for periods of time. But they're missing it. They're missing it enough times. So if they're not able to satisfy their child's needs most of the time, sometimes the child will start to signal comfort. Sometimes children won't be signaling comfort at all. You'll run into children who've experienced this and have not had their needs met on a regular basis. They stop crying, right? They realize that if they cry, no one's going to comfort them. So these kids have a cycle that's really different than child who has a healthy attachment. And if this happens most of the time for kids, kids develop a sense of mistrust, fear, shame, anxiety, dysregulation. They haven't figured out how to calm themselves, and they have a disrupted mental blueprint. And what that means is the world doesn't make sense to them, right? They have a need, and they don't know if their need's going to get met or not. So this scenario can be really challenging. And these are many of the kids that come into our homes have experienced this. So their foundation, these feelings, these experiences are their foundation. So they're going to react to you when you're just doing your normal parenting job. They're going to come at you from a place of mistrust, fear, shame, anxiety. This is where they're going to be. So our job is to help heal this piece. And the way we heal this piece, the way we help these kids is this. We do this cycle with our kids. So if they're 3 or 8 or 17 years old, we are doing this piece. They demonstrate that they're uncomfortable. We figure out a way to satisfy their need. They show us comfort. We continue to support them. And over time, if we repeat this cycle, they'll start to form a sense of security, trust, attachment, self-regulation, and object constancy with us.
Curious if a couple folks could speak up around how they think their caregivers might respond to this information, or how they might continue this conversation after watching this video.
kind of a normal thing when you're talking about the thinking about attachment is the older. I think that most of our care providers can really relate to a newborn, right? And having those needs and completing that cycle. I think that more often than not, the conversation kind of leads to what would that look like for a 7-year-old? What would that look like for a 10-year-old? Kind of the older kiddos get, I think that it becomes a little bit more challenging to wrap your brain around it. And so I think a lot of the conversations tend to go that direction.
That's a great point. I think what I might respond to that is to talk about, yes, this is more difficult and you need to put on your detective hat, right? And look, do what you can to look underneath. So a child screaming or yelling at you, right? What's might be underneath, and sometimes it's guesswork, right? You know, make a guess about what's going on and respond to that need. The other reaction people often have to this is, well, I'll see if anyone else has one before I say that. Other thoughts? The other reaction that I often hear is, does that mean I have to give in to my kid for everything they want? Every time they want something, I have to give it to them? Or I'm spoiling my child? To which I respond, you do need to give in to their every emotional need. You need to satisfy every emotional need. It doesn't mean they get every toy or every outing or everything they want to do, but satisfying their emotional needs, yep, that is a priority. So that comes up sometimes.
I'd like to add one more thing too. When I have done this cycle in classes, I've also talked about sort of the personified sibling, and I look at the chart, like when a parent doesn't meet the need, how sometimes a sibling comes in and meets the need, and then the sibling, like the younger sibling, might actually do okay because they had not the parent, but they had somebody else looking out for them, and how complicated that can be when that older sibling might go into care and isn't placed with their sibling, like the issues that can bring up, or if they are placed together as a sibling set, how it can be hard for that sibling to step back and let the foster parents or their grandparents or other family members take care of that child.
Thanks, Sharon. So the other thing that I find happens after folks watch this is they feel discouraged. They feel discouraged. And especially if they newly recognize or are re-reminded of some of the stuff their child went through and some of the behaviors that they're having. So it can feel really discouraging. So this is your job to hold both, you know, it's always holding, we want to validate the real difficult experiences that our caregivers are having. We never want to sugarcoat that. We need to validate it, and we need to give them hope and tools so that they don't feel overwhelmed and they can keep caring for their kids. So we acknowledge that they feel discouraged. This is the cycle that I did in the video, so we just review it again for folks. And then we talk about the answer. So the answer to all of these difficulties is attunement. So this is the part where we're getting into the hope part. So we explain what attunement is. We talk about how the brain is connected to attunement, and this is a little image of that. We have another video, it's about 2 minutes. I won't show it now, but it's me talking with a coworker with we have a baby, not a real baby, in our arms, and we talk about attunement. Then we ask people, so what are some ways, what would you do with an infant? We have them talk about how they would attune and connect with an infant. And so this is where you want to start a list. So for the rest of this training, you're keeping a list. If it's in person, it's on a flipboard. If it's in the class, it's in the chat box, as people generate ideas. So we're going to, throughout the rest of this, talk about different ways to attune, and you'll end up with a whole long list of incredible things that caregivers have done around attuning with their kids. So we talk about, you know, some of the ways they do it with babies, as Carrie was bringing up. This part's easy, right? And so then we have to start talking about how do you transfer that to older kids. And you'll always have someone in the class who's been really creative and come up with some good ideas with older kids. And then we're going to talk through, the rest of this training is talking about through 4 models of how to attune with kids. And this isn't a lengthy training on any of these models. It's just to get people's mind thinking about these different ideas, and then also there are resources that they can follow up and do more research on their own. So we talk about Dan Hughes and what, he talks about PACE, being playful, accepting, curious, empathic. So you present this piece. Then there's this great video. If we have time at the end, I'll show it. I don't know if it's a father and son doing this beautiful attuning with each other. So if we have time before we end today, I'll show this. But this is a great, I think it's a 1 minute long video. Then we talk about the second way is using serve and return, right? Which is the natural thing that happens between a parent and a child when things are healthy, the back and forth, back and forth. And we demonstrate, this is a video that's through the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard. So again, this is a 3 or 4 long video that helps demonstrate that piece. Then we talk about Bruce Perry and the whole idea of rhythm and regulation. And so he talks about doing patterned, repetitive, rhythmic, somatosensory activities. So we describe that a little bit. And then we start, this is a generative list of different things that people can do that are rhythmic, repetitive activities. Are you impressed with my PowerPoint skills here? Go ahead, you can like
this is a question about PowerPoint skills. For those people who might not be as familiar with using a PowerPoint during a presentation, I know some animations just come up and some you have to click as you go through. Could you do you want to talk about that a little bit for those who aren't familiar, or is that in the notes? How many times you have to click? What kind of
That's a good question. I'm not remembering. So sometimes I tell you to click, a couple times I may not have done that consistently. So all the more reason to go through the PowerPoint at least once before you present it to recognize where those clicks might be. This one, I just had a click at the beginning and it did all the rest on its own. So again, we're getting people to think about some of these different ideas, and oops, I jumped ahead. And I would pause here and say, have people done any of these? And then they might give you some anecdotal stories about what's helped or not helped with them. But again, it gets them thinking. You're adding more to the list of things that they can do. We talk about the circle of courage. Again, this is a really brief explanation of the circle of courage, but we talk about how these 4 things make a huge difference for all of us as we develop and grow. And so how caregivers can find ways for the children or youth in their home to gain a sense of independence, mastery, belonging, and generosity. And then I think this is the last video. Then this is a video from the Circle of Security International, which has incredible videos, but this one is called Bigger, Wiser, Stronger, and Kind. And it really is kind of an inspirational video for caregivers. And then, after the video, you stop and say, what did you learn and what will you do? So that's the final slide in that piece. I'm gonna stop for a second. As we've gone through the rest of this, what are your thoughts about this piece so far, or as you imagine yourself teaching this part, or what might be easy or challenging?
I love the videos. I think that really takes off a bit of stress when you're thinking about teaching things, and having really good quality videos throughout it just makes all the difference.
I agree. And that's one of the challenges of doing online training, right? So that's a stuck place that we have right now. Okay, get ready to laugh and cry.
Okay. They need to work on that, right? Yes, okay. Did you understand it though? No. Okay. All right. Huh? Oh, no, not this one. This is the grand finale of this. Yeah, that's the last one. That's what I was wondering. I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they did some stuff this time. Exactly what I was thinking. Oh yeah. Right. Don't bring that again. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I think that. Yeah. Yeah. Like go somewhere else with that, but don't bring it here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what I think so. Okay.
All right, that was the whole thing. But you know, the point is that attunement, it doesn't have to be this big giant activity that you participate in. It's those beautiful moments that caregivers and kids can have between each other. So trying to emphasize that piece. All right, those are the things that I wanted to show you. And I guess I'd just love to give folks a little bit more of an opportunity to think about whether you want to do this, whether you want to wait. Our original idea was to pilot it in Burlington, and then we've been doing a little bit of an assessment, a study of how it went in Burlington, and then rolling it out. We're still going to go forward with that, but a lot of time has passed, and with COVID, it might be a great time to do some of these trainings. So please reach out to me if you want to be a part of this and want to do this. It also, I'm wondering if it could be a helpful way to get some of the foster parent meetings off the ground, especially for districts where it's not been happening. Other questions, thoughts?
I wonder about if we're going to do a virtual training, or if somebody within the district, wondering if it will be specific for just that district or whether or not it will be opened up statewide. I think some people feel more comfortable than others. And, I think that support groups across the state, I think they're all in very, very different places. And so I don't know if it would be possible to kind of offer it statewide, or even with, connecting districts, but maybe kind of starting there instead of each individual district. I just don't know whether the comfort level is there, and with technology, we're struggling with kind of orientation and those pieces. And to implement an entire training, I think the material's great. I think it would be welcome. I just wonder if maybe that's an option as well.
What do folks think of that?
This is Kathy. I think, Carrie, I love the idea of being able to partner with somebody else to pull these trainings off. I think, if we can get more people trained, that's the whole point, right? So it doesn't matter if they're from Bennington or from Hartford or from Newport, as long as people are getting trained. So I would totally be up to, working with somebody to make these happen. Outside of Megan, who's awesome, of course, but somebody from another district.
That's a great idea. And it might inevitably build up your own districts. As people get connected, they might be more likely to come to your foster parent groups. Great. Well, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you giving me time to do this. And as I said, I'm happy to help you think outside the box or adapt it to virtual, or doing a couple of districts together. That's fine. Reach out to me and I can send you all the material. There are 10 modules, and only 6 of them are done. I have 4 more to complete. The last 4 are not completed, but they'll be completed within the next month or 2.
So Amy, I know in the ones that we did, there was some activities in each module. How are you doing that with the online piece?
Yeah, most of the activities have been discussion related or writing things down. So I think that can work with breakout rooms. If you don't have breakout rooms, I think that makes it a little bit more complicated. So a lot of it depends on what platform people have. But as those come up, let's stay in touch about it and work on some of those adaptations. Because so much of it depends on your technology, the audience.
Right.
Yeah. Is there a specific activity you remember? One's not coming to my mind that.
No, I just remember doing a couple like small group activities for each module that we did.
Right.
So, and if we can't use Zoom, I don't know that, I haven't played around with Skype that much, but I don't know that it's possible to do like breakout groups in Skype. So
right.
I just didn't know if you had tweaked the curriculum any to change those pieces around, or if that was taken out altogether, or yeah.
I haven't tweaked it yet, but you're reminding me I should do that. So I'll work on that. Thanks. Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah. Sorry to give you more work to do.
It's fine. It's fine.
Another maybe good place to start would be for one of us to receive the information, and then maybe a couple of us get onto a Skype meeting and play around with it a little bit and see. I'm curious. I mean, the video that we utilize for Brenda is a YouTube video. And so I'm not positive if it will make a difference with the videos that you're using, Amy, to have them play on Skype, but it would be an interesting kind of next step to see if it's a concern or if it would work smooth.
Good point. Sharon, anything else you want to add or say?
No, except thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if, I know you said you were going to send out some video links. Since I was going to send some things out also, I wonder if we could just combine our efforts so they just get one email. So when they're scanning through for it, it can be one-stop shopping for them.
Yes, although I realized after I said that the email that got sent to everyone this morning has all those video links.
Oh, nice.
They're within the PowerPoints though, so maybe I could send them separately. Yeah, Sharon, you and I can talk about that. All right, I want to win points for ending early. So let's end 4 minutes early. Then you'll like Sharon and I more. And
start late, end early, right?
It's perfect. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Are you staying on, Amy?
Yes, for you.
For you. Let's see, who's this? That's Michelle Coburn. I'm just gonna, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna remove her. And Stephanie Reel.
Nothing personal.
Nothing personal. They stepped away. They're gonna come back and be like, what? I think that went really well. I shouldn't say that. I should lead with, how do you think it went?
I think it went well. Also, you're right about the open-ended questions. I struggle with that, and I struggle with this group because whatever. People talk if they wanted to talk. It's the same people that seem to talk. So
always the same people. It's Sarah, it's Carrie, it's Kathy. What didn't happen today was Becky Loeb saying, oh wait, let me stop recording.